Good morning. You are listening to Silent Waves Radio. I am Alex Mercer, and I want to begin this hour by telling you that what we are about to report is, at this moment, still being verified by our editorial team. We are not in the habit of going to air with unconfirmed information. But in the last 40 minutes, the volume of corroborating sources, law enforcement feeds, hospital dispatch frequencies, eyewitness accounts streaming in from across the eastern seaboard, has reached a threshold that we cannot, in good conscience, ignore. Something is happening. We do not yet have a complete picture. What we do have, we will give you.
And I want to add to what Alex just said. If you have children in the room, if you are someone who is already feeling anxious or uncertain this morning, please know that we are going to be careful with how we present this. We are not going to sensationalize. We are not going to speculate beyond what we know, but we also are not going to soften facts that people need to hear in order to make decisions about their own safety. That has always been the promise of this station, and we are keeping it today. My name is Sierra Lane. Let's go to what we know.
At approximately 4:47 this morning, Eastern Time, emergency dispatch centers in Baltimore, Maryland, began receiving an unusual volume of calls. The nature of those calls was consistent. Reports of individuals behaving erratically in public spaces. The word used repeatedly across dozens of separate calls was aggressive, not argumentative, not intoxicated in any recognizable way. The callers described people moving in ways that were described as, and I'm quoting directly from a transcript provided to us, wrong, just wrong, like something was wrong with how they were moving. Police units were dispatched. Initial response was routine.
What was not routine was what those officers reported when they arrived. We have a partial transcript. Again, this is from a police dispatch recording, not something our team generated. And in it, you can hear an officer, call sign Delta 7, reporting back to dispatch. He says, and I quote, "Dispatch, I don't know how to describe this. The subject is not responding to commands. There is significant visible injury to the subject, and the subject is still, dispatch, the subject is still moving." There's a pause of about 4 seconds. Then Delta 7 says, "Dispatch, I need backup. I need a lot of backup." That was the moment, for a lot of people who later listened to that recording, that this stopped feeling like an isolated incident.
Within the next 90 minutes, similar calls were coming in from Washington, D.C., from Philadelphia, from portions of Northern Virginia, and from 2 separate precincts in New York City, specifically from the Bronx and from a neighborhood in Queens, near John F. Kennedy Airport. The geographic spread is significant. This was not a single location event. The incidents were not clustered. They were distributed. And that distribution pattern tells us something important. Either we are looking at simultaneous, spontaneous emergence, or we are looking at something that had been developing for some time before it became visible. We don't know which yet. Both possibilities carry serious implications.
I want to take a moment here because behind those dispatch calls and those geographic data points are real people, fictional as this broadcast may be, who woke up this morning and are now living through something they have no framework for. I'm reading a message that came into our listener line about 20 minutes ago. The sender says they are in Baltimore in the Fells Point neighborhood. They write, "I am in my apartment. I can hear things outside. I looked out the window and I don't want to describe what I saw. My neighbor knocked on my door about an hour ago and I didn't answer because she wasn't knocking the right way. I don't know how else to say that. She wasn't knocking the right way. Please tell me what to do." We don't have an answer for that person yet, but we hear them. We are working to get answers.
I want to bring in some context on the medical and biological dimension of this, because that framing matters for understanding what responders are dealing with. Our station has been in contact this morning with a public health official. We are not naming this individual because they are not authorized to speak publicly, who described the presenting characteristics of affected individuals as unlike anything in standard medical literature. The affected individuals display extreme aggression, apparent insensitivity to pain, and what the official called severely compromised higher cognitive function. Blood pressure and heart rate readings taken from one individual in Baltimore were, quote, inconsistent with life as we understand it. That is not a phrase we expected to be reading on air this morning.
And that phrase, inconsistent with life as we understand it, that is the phrase that I keep coming back to, because it tells you something about the emotional state of the people on the front lines of this right now. These are trained medical professionals. These are emergency responders, and they are encountering something that their training did not prepare them for. And the way that expresses itself in language is that they reach for clinical formality because the alternative, describing what they're actually seeing in plain language, is something they may not yet be ready to do. I think we need to honor that. There is a particular kind of courage in continuing to file reports, continuing to transmit data, when what you're looking at defies everything you were taught.
We are now receiving word from our affiliate in Philadelphia that the situation there has escalated significantly in the last 30 minutes. According to our contact, Temple University Hospital has gone into lockdown. That is a significant development. A hospital lockdown typically indicates one of two things. Either the facility is managing a mass casualty event and needs to control access, or the facility itself has been compromised internally. We do not yet know which applies here. What we do know is that the hospital has ceased accepting incoming ambulances as of approximately 15 minutes ago, and those units are now being diverted to Jefferson University Hospital, which our contact says is currently operating at 160% of normal emergency capacity.
160% capacity. I want listeners to understand what that means in practical terms. It means patients are in hallways. It means triage has moved to the parking structure. It means that the nurses and the doctors inside that building are making decisions right now in real time about who gets a bed and who doesn't, who gets treatment immediately and who has to wait. And some of the people who have to wait are not going to be okay with waiting. That is the human reality of that number. And I want to say for the record that the people working in those hospitals this morning, whoever they are, whatever their names, are doing something extraordinary. They are doing their jobs in circumstances that are not survivable for some of them, and they are staying.
We are now approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes into what we are formally designating this broadcast as a developing emergency of unknown origin and scope. I want to give listeners some of the hard numbers we have at this moment, with the full acknowledgement that these numbers are going to change, and they are going to change in one direction. As of the last verified update, which came in at approximately 6:22 this morning, confirmed deaths attributable to this event stand at an estimated 214 individuals across the greater Baltimore-Washington corridor. The word confirmed is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Emergency communication infrastructure in affected areas is fragmenting, which means the actual number is almost certainly higher. We would not be responsible journalists if we didn't say that clearly.
214. I want to stay with that number for a moment because it's still a number that we can hold in our minds. It's still a number where you can imagine the individual weight of each one. In a few hours, that may not be possible anymore. I think one of the things that happens in catastrophic events is that the scale eventually exceeds human emotional comprehension, and the numbers stop feeling like people and start feeling like data. And I want to resist that for as long as I can, and I want to ask our listeners to resist it with us. 214 people this morning. Each of them was somebody's morning. Each of them had a plan for today that did not include this.
We're getting a statement coming across our wire now from the office of the Governor of Maryland. I'm going to read this in its entirety. The statement reads, "The state of Maryland is aware of and is actively monitoring developing public safety situations in the Baltimore metropolitan area. I have declared a state of emergency effective immediately, which will free up state resources and allow for enhanced coordination with federal authorities. I am asking all residents of Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Anne Arundel County to shelter in place. Do not go outside unless you are directed to do so by emergency personnel. Do not attempt to travel to hospitals or emergency facilities unless you are experiencing a life-threatening medical emergency unrelated to this event. Emergency services are at maximum capacity. I want to assure the people of Maryland that every resource available to this state is being deployed. I will have further updates within the hour. End of statement. No press conference. No questions. That in itself tells you something about the pace of what is happening.
Shelter in place. I know those words are familiar to a lot of our listeners. We've heard them during severe weather, during certain kinds of hazardous material incidents. But I want to be careful here because the context matters enormously. Sheltering in place assumes that your place is safe. It assumes that the threat is external, is outside your walls. And based on what we are hearing from listeners and from some of our emergency contacts, that assumption may not hold everywhere. If you are in an apartment building, if you share hallways with neighbors, if you have reason to believe the affected individuals are inside your building, we cannot in good conscience tell you that sheltering in place is the only option. We want you to use your judgment. We want you to be safe.
An important infrastructure development to report. The Calvert Cliffs Nuclear Power Station in Lusby, Maryland has, according to a brief statement from the plant's Public Affairs Office, initiated a precautionary operational reduction. They are not using the word shutdown, and they are being very careful about the language. But a precautionary operational reduction at a nuclear facility in the midst of a regional emergency is a significant event. The facility cites, quote, difficulty maintaining adequate staffing levels due to regional transportation disruptions. That is the infrastructure story beginning to emerge here. This is not only a human safety event. This is becoming a systems event. When staffing at critical infrastructure begins to fail, power generation, water treatment, communications relay, the secondary effects begin compounding very quickly.
And I want to thread something here between what Alex is saying about infrastructure and what's happening at the human level, because they are not separate stories. When a power grid begins to strain, it is not an abstract problem. It means the ventilators in those overcrowded hospitals run on backup generators that have a finite supply of fuel. It means the refrigeration units that store blood for transfusions start to become unreliable. It means the traffic management systems that emergency vehicles depend on to move quickly through cities stop functioning, and ambulances that are already overwhelmed spend more time sitting in intersections. Infrastructure failure is not a story about machines. It is a story about the people who depend on those machines to stay alive.
We're now approaching the 90-minute mark. I want to update the geographic picture because it has expanded considerably in the last half hour. We are now receiving credible reports of similar incidents in New York City. And when I say New York City, I want to be specific. We are looking at confirmed affected individuals in the Bronx, as mentioned earlier, but also now in portions of Upper Manhattan. And there is a report, unconfirmed, I want to stress unconfirmed, of an incident at Penn Station. If that is accurate, the implications for rail transportation and for crowd management in one of the densest pedestrian environments in the country are severe. Penn Station processes hundreds of thousands of people on a normal morning. It is not a location where you want an uncontrolled emergency of any kind.
Penn Station. And I think about all the people who were there this morning because they were going somewhere, because they had someone to see or a meeting to get to, or they were heading home. People who were mid-journey when this began. And that is one of the particular cruelties of something that unfolds this quickly. It catches people in transit. People are separated from their homes, from their families, from whatever sense of safety they've built for themselves. And the decision of whether to continue moving or to stop moving, to shelter where you are or to try to get somewhere else. That decision becomes nearly impossible when the information you need to make it keeps changing. I want to tell everyone who is in transit right now, who is stranded somewhere, who is trying to figure out what to do. You are not alone in not knowing what to do.
We now have our first official federal statement of the morning. The White House press office has released the following, attributed to the National Security Advisor. The President has been briefed on developing public safety situations across multiple states. The administration is in active coordination with FEMA, the Department of Defense, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The President has authorized the activation of National Guard units in Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York. The public should know that the federal government is responding with full urgency to this situation. Further information will be provided as the situation develops. That is a carefully worded statement. The phrase, developing public safety situations, note the plural, is the federal government acknowledging what we've been saying for 90 minutes. This is multi-state. This is national level.
I'm reading another listener message. This one comes from someone who says they are in Washington, D.C., near the Capitol Hill neighborhood. They write, I am a night shift nurse at a facility I won't name. I just finished my shift and I can't get home. I'm sitting in my car in the parking garage. I've been listening to you for the last hour. I want you to know that what you're describing, the way people are moving, the way they're not responding, I saw that last night. We had 3 patients admitted with those symptoms around midnight. By 2 in the morning, 2 of them had to be physically restrained. By 4, we had lost containment of Ward C, and the night supervisor made the call to seal the floor. I left when she told us to leave. I don't know what happened after I left. I don't know if my colleagues are okay. I'm telling you this because I think people need to know it started before this morning. This started before anyone was ready. We believe that listener, and we think what she's describing matters enormously.
That account, if accurate, is significant for the timeline. A midnight presentation in a D.C. area hospital would push the origin of observable symptoms back by nearly 5 hours from the first dispatch calls in Baltimore, which means the window between initial infection or onset, whatever the mechanism is, and visible behavioral manifestation may be longer than initial observations suggested. And a longer latency period has serious implications. It means a wider distribution of undetected cases. It means people who are currently asymptomatic, who feel fine, who are perhaps listening to this broadcast right now. Some of them may be in the early stages of whatever this is. We do not say that to cause panic. We say it because it is a logical inference from available data, and our listeners deserve logical inferences.
I want to sit with something that Alex just said, because I think it's the most frightening thing we've said so far, and it deserves more than a statistical treatment. The idea that some people who are listening right now, people who got up and made coffee and turned on the radio, people who feel completely normal, the idea that some of them are already changed in some way they don't yet know, that is a particular kind of terror. Because the things we rely on to know ourselves, to know whether we're okay, to know whether we're safe, those things become unreliable. And when we can't trust our own sense of ourselves, when we can't trust our neighbors, when we can't trust that the person walking toward us on the street is who they appear to be, that is when the social fabric that we all depend on, that invisible web of trust that lets cities function, that is when it begins to tear.
We are now 2 hours into this broadcast. I want to give listeners an updated picture of what we know, what we don't know, and what we are trying to find out. Confirmed incident locations now include Baltimore, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the Bronx and portions of Manhattan in New York, a report, still being verified, of incidents in Pittsburgh, and, in the last 20 minutes, our first reports from outside the Northeast Corridor. We are getting calls and messages from our listeners in Atlanta, Georgia, and in Columbus, Ohio. If confirmed, this is no longer a regional event. The scale of geographic distribution across this time frame, without a clear single point of origin, that is either the sign of an extremely efficient transmission mechanism or the sign that the event began at multiple locations simultaneously. Neither scenario is good.
Atlanta. I want to pause on Atlanta because Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport is one of the busiest airports in the world, one of the most connected transportation hubs on the planet. And if this thing, whatever it is, however it moves, if it is at or near that airport, then we are talking about potential global distribution in a way that makes everything else we've discussed this morning look like a local story. I want to be clear that we do not have confirmed information about the airport specifically. What we have is listener reports from Atlanta. But I think it would be irresponsible not to say out loud what the geographic implications are. And I think it would be irresponsible not to say what I imagine aviation authorities around the world are thinking right now if they are listening to what we are listening to.
The FAA has issued a Notice to Air Missions, a NOTAM, affecting airspace over the Baltimore-Washington corridor, grounding all non-essential air traffic in that region. Hartsfield-Jackson, as of this broadcast, remains open, but we are seeing on aviation monitoring resources that arrival traffic into Atlanta is being rerouted and held at significant distances. That is not a full ground stop, but it is a sign that aviation authorities are watching the Atlanta situation carefully. Meanwhile, we have confirmation that Amtrak has suspended all Northeast Corridor service, all of it. That is Boston to Washington, every train stopped. The Northeast Corridor carries approximately 12 million passengers annually. On a weekday morning, there are dozens of active trains on that line at any given moment. Those trains have been instructed to stop at the nearest station and hold.
I'm thinking about all the people who are now stranded on those trains, sitting in train cars, looking at their phones, getting partial information from a dozen different sources, trying to piece together what is real. And I'm thinking about the crew members, the conductors, the attendants, who are being asked to manage that situation, to keep people calm, to answer questions they don't have answers to. Every emergency has these invisible heroes, the people whose job it is to hold the shape of normalcy for everyone around them, even as everything falls apart. The train conductor who says, "Please remain in your seat, we are awaiting further instructions," and says it calmly and says it again and again. That person is doing an extraordinary thing.
I want to bring in a brief excerpt from a press conference that just concluded, held by the CDC in Atlanta. The director spoke for approximately 4 minutes. I'm going to summarize and quote the most significant portion. The director stated, "We are actively investigating reports of a novel biological or neurological phenomenon affecting individuals in multiple states. At this time, we cannot confirm the mechanism of transmission, the rate of progression, or the full scope of the affected population. What we can confirm is that we are treating this with the highest level of urgency and are in direct communication with the World Health Organization. I want to be direct with the American public. We do not yet fully understand what we are dealing with. What we understand is that affected individuals display a consistent pattern of severe behavioral disruption, and that this pattern appears to be communicable under certain conditions of close contact. Avoid close contact with individuals displaying erratic or aggressive behavior. If you have been in close physical contact with an affected individual, seek medical guidance immediately." The director then left without taking questions.
We do not yet fully understand what we are dealing with. That is the director of the Centers for Disease Control saying that publicly. And I know for some of our listeners that is going to be terrifying, and for others it may be strangely clarifying. Because when the top of the expert pyramid says, "We don't know," it validates something that I think a lot of people have been feeling this morning, which is that the normal frameworks don't apply. And when the frameworks don't apply, the temptation is to fall back on fear, on rumors, on the worst case version of every piece of information. I want to ask our listeners to resist that. I want to ask you to stay with us, to stay with verified information, to sit with uncertainty rather than fill it with panic. That is harder than it sounds. It is also the only rational response right now.
We are 2 hours and roughly 20 minutes into this broadcast, and I want to address something that is happening across the country right now that we've been monitoring. Gas stations in the major cities we've mentioned are reporting panic buying. We are seeing reports from Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania of gas stations that have completely run out of fuel. We are seeing reports of highway gridlock on Achos 95 northbound and southbound simultaneously, which means people are fleeing in both directions, which tells you that people don't have a clear sense of where safe is. We are seeing reports of supermarkets in Atlanta being stripped of bottled water and non-perishables in under an hour. And we are seeing the first reports of civil disturbance, people fighting over resources, altercations at gas stations, a report of gunfire in a Philadelphia suburb that appears to be related to a crowd control situation and not to the primary emergency.
I want to address the gunfire report specifically because this is something that happens in every large-scale emergency, and it is always devastating. When people are frightened, genuinely bone-level frightened, the kind of frightened that we are all to varying degrees feeling right now, some of them reach for the thing that makes them feel least vulnerable. And in this country, for a lot of people, that thing is a firearm. And I understand that impulse. I do not judge it. But I want to say clearly that the data from every mass emergency event we have ever studied shows that armed civilians in an uncontrolled situation create more casualties, not fewer. The responders trying to navigate those situations, the National Guard units that the president just authorized, the police officers still at their posts, they are put at greater risk when the environment is unpredictable. Please, if you are armed right now, please be responsible. Please think about who is around you before you act.
We have a major infrastructure development to report. The PJM interconnection, which manages the power grid for 13 states and the District of Columbia, serving approximately 65 million people, has just issued a Level 1 emergency alert. This is the first of 3 escalating alert levels. A Level 1 indicates that the grid is operating under stressed conditions and that there is a risk of rolling blackouts if demand is not reduced, or if additional generation cannot be brought online. The cause is multifactorial. The Calvert Cliffs situation we reported earlier, reduced staffing at multiple other generation facilities, and an unexpected surge in demand as people shelter in place and run electrical systems they wouldn't normally be running at this hour of the morning. This is a grid that was not designed for this kind of simultaneous stress.
And when that grid goes, if it goes, I want our listeners to think about what that means for their specific situation. If you have a medical device that requires electricity, a CPAP, a home dialysis machine, a ventilator, you need to think now about what your backup plan is. If you are in an elevator, you need to make sure you can get out. If you are in a building with electric locks or electronic security systems, those systems will default in different ways, and you need to know how your building will default. If you have elderly neighbors, if you have neighbors who are isolated, this is the moment to check on them. Carefully, and with all the appropriate caution that this morning requires. The loss of power in a situation like this is not just an inconvenience, it is a multiplier of every other vulnerability.
We are now beginning to receive our first international reports. The World Health Organization has issued a global health advisory, not yet at the level of a public health emergency of international concern, but a global health advisory is significant and unusual. We are also seeing reports from the United Kingdom, specifically from London, of several individuals being taken into custody near Heathrow Airport, displaying symptoms consistent with what we are describing in the United States. The UK's National Health Service is reporting that these individuals arrived on overnight flights from the United States and were flagged by ground staff upon arrival. The UK government has not yet made a formal statement, but has, according to our international desk, convened an emergency COBRA meeting, that is the UK's highest level emergency management body, as of approximately 40 minutes ago.
London. And I want to think about what that means because this is the moment, if the London reports are confirmed, when this stops being an American emergency and starts being a human one. Because Heathrow is one of the world's great nodes of connection. Hundreds of flights a day, every continent, every major city. If something traveled on those overnight flights, the question becomes not, did it spread internationally? But how far did it spread before anyone was looking? And that is a question that doesn't have a comfortable answer. I want to say something to any international listeners who may be joining us right now. From the UK, from Canada, from wherever you are, we see you. We know you are watching the situation. We know you are trying to figure out what it means for you. We don't have answers yet. But we are going to keep broadcasting.
2 hours and 50 minutes. The casualty estimate has been revised. I want to be very careful about how I present this, because the numbers are coming from fragmented sources and there is wide variance in the estimates. But the most credible composite figure we have, drawing on state emergency management feeds, hospital reports, and National Guard communication intercepts that have been shared with us. The estimated death toll in the United States as of this moment is between 3,000 and 6,000 individuals. I want to say that slowly, between 3,000 and 6,000, in under 3 hours. Those numbers are expected to revise significantly upward as communication from affected areas improves and as the National Guard begins to assess the full scope of affected zones. We have moved beyond any comparison to known mass casualty events in American peacetime history.
Between 3,000 and 6,000. And I am going to do what I said I was going to do, which is stay with those numbers as people. 3,000 people, 6,000 people, in the time that we have been on air. And I want to read one more listener message because I think this is exactly the right moment for it. This one came in about 10 minutes ago. It says, "My name doesn't matter. I'm in a church in Philadelphia. There are about 40 of us in here. We have the doors locked. We have a woman with us who is a doctor. She has been treating people. We have no supplies. We have no cell signal except one phone that has a bar. We are okay for now. We sang together about an hour ago. I don't know why I'm telling you that, but it seemed important. We sang, we're going to be okay." We believe them. And yes, it matters. The singing matters.
We are approaching the 3-hour mark. I want to give listeners a structured update on the military response because it has been developing rapidly and it is significant. National Guard units have been activated in 14 states. We have confirmed active deployments in Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Georgia, and Ohio. The deployments have 3 primary objectives. First, establishing perimeter containment around the most severely affected zones. Second, supporting hospital and medical infrastructure. Third, facilitating evacuation corridors for civilian populations in the highest risk areas. The concept of perimeter containment around an American city is something that had no modern peacetime precedent. The National Guard is trained for it in the abstract. Actually executing it in a city the size of Baltimore or Philadelphia with the available personnel in the time frame we're discussing, that is an enormous logistical challenge.
And I want to name what perimeter containment means for the people living inside those perimeters. It means you are being told that you cannot leave. It means that the government has made a calculation. And I'm not saying it's the wrong calculation. I genuinely don't know. But a calculation has been made that the containment of this thing is worth the reality of trapping people inside it. That is a profound ethical decision. And I want to acknowledge that decision out loud because the people inside those perimeters deserve to hear it named. They are not just numbers in a containment model. They are people who may be saying to themselves right now, why can't I leave? Why won't they let me out? What am I being sacrificed for? And that is a legitimate thing to feel. Even if containment is the right strategy, the people bearing that cost deserve acknowledgement.
We have a significant update from New York City. The mayor of New York City has ordered the immediate closure of all 5 borough bridges and tunnels to outbound civilian traffic. I want to make sure listeners understand that correctly. Bridges and tunnels are closed to outbound traffic, people leaving the city, but they remain open to inbound emergency and military traffic. The official statement from the mayor's office says this is a traffic management measure to ensure emergency vehicle priority access. That framing is, charitably, incomplete. The more direct reading is that New York City is beginning a containment operation. The Port Authority has simultaneously suspended all ferry service, and the MTA has suspended subway service on all lines as of 11 minutes ago. New York City's surface transportation infrastructure has effectively stopped.
New York City's subway system moves approximately 3.5 million people on a normal weekday. That system is now stopped. And the people who were on trains when service stopped, they are in tunnels right now, in the dark, with other people they don't know. And I want to say to any Metropolitan Transit Authority employees who are listening, who were driving those trains, who were working those stations when the order came, you are in extraordinary circumstances and you are being asked to manage them. I know there are transit workers right now helping people off trains in dark tunnels, walking through stations that are filling with confused and frightened passengers, using flashlights and their own calm voices as the only tools they have. I want to say that clearly and directly. Those people are heroic, in the most practical, specific, undramatic sense of that word.
An important development on the medical science side. A research team at Johns Hopkins, which has been working continuously through the night on blood and tissue samples from early-stage patients, has released a preliminary finding, and they are flagging this as extremely preliminary, not peer-reviewed, subject to revision. But the finding is significant enough that it is being taken seriously at the federal level. The team has identified what they are describing as a novel prion-like pathogen. I want to be careful about the terminology here. A pathogen that appears to target and rapidly disrupt the neural architecture associated with executive function and behavioral inhibition. In plain language, whatever this is, it attacks the parts of the brain that control decision-making, impulse control, and the recognition of others as persons. It does not destroy consciousness in a simple way. It redirects it. And it appears to be transmissible through direct contact with infected biological material.
A prion-like pathogen. And for our listeners who may not be familiar with prion diseases, the key word there is like. This is something novel, something that shares characteristics with known prion diseases in terms of how it affects brain tissue, but that operates with a speed that has never been documented before. And normal prion diseases take years to decades to manifest symptoms. Whatever this is, it appears to operate on a timeline of hours. And I think the word prion-like is doing something very specific in that statement. It is the researchers saying, we have a framework for this. It resembles something we know, but it also fundamentally exceeds anything we know. That gap between what they know and what they're seeing is where the terror lives for them. And I want to honor that. The scientists working on this right now are staring into a gap they have never encountered before.
We are 3 hours into this broadcast. I want to step back and give listeners a full geographic picture of the United States as we understand it right now. The Northeast, Baltimore, Washington, Philadelphia, New York, is experiencing severe multi-site incidents with active military containment operations underway. Atlanta remains a significant concern with unconfirmed but credible incident reports. The airport is in a holding pattern. Ohio, specifically Columbus, has reports of at least 3 separate incident sites. Chicago has issued a public health advisory, not yet at the level of the other cities, but they are clearly watching and preparing. Los Angeles has begun what the mayor's office is calling a precautionary alert posture, which in practice means law enforcement is on maximum deployment and hospitals are activating emergency protocols. The coasts are not safe. The interior is not safe. No geography is confirmed safe at this point.
And that phrase, no geography is confirmed safe, is one that I know is landing very heavily for a lot of people. Because what we do in emergencies, what human beings have always done, is try to find the safe place, try to move toward it, try to get our people to it. And right now, we don't have a safe place to point to. We have degrees of risk. We have areas that are more affected and areas that appear less affected. But we do not have a place we can say, go there, you will be safe. And I want to be honest about the psychological weight of that because it matters. When there is no safe place, the temptation is to create one, to decide that wherever you are or wherever your loved ones are is safe because you need it to be. That is a very human thing, and it is a very dangerous thing.
We have confirmation that the power grid situation has worsened. PJM interconnection has elevated its alert to level 2. Rolling blackouts are now in effect in parts of Maryland, Delaware, and southern Pennsylvania. The Baltimore metropolitan area is intermittently without power. When power is lost in a city where people are sheltering in place, the immediate effects include loss of communication for those who haven't charged devices, loss of HVAC systems in extreme temperatures, loss of elevator access in multi-story buildings, loss of powered medical equipment, and critically, loss of lighting in any exterior environment, which in a situation like this dramatically increases the danger of movement at night. We are currently in daylight hours, but that will change, and the timeline for grid restoration in an emergency of this scale is not something anyone is able to provide right now.
I'm going to read a longer message that came in through our website because I think it captures something that is happening that we haven't fully addressed. This person writes, I am an emergency room attending physician. I'm not going to give my location. I want to tell you what we are doing because I think people should know. We established triage in our parking lot an hour ago. We have tagged patients green, yellow, and red in the traditional way. But we have added a fourth category. We are calling it Black Plus. That is our designation for patients who are in the late stage of whatever this is. Not deceased, not salvageable, still moving. We cannot treat those patients in a way that allows them to be near other patients. I am not going to say what we are doing with them. I want you to know that every person on my team made that decision together. It was unanimous, and it was the hardest thing I've ever been part of. We are still here. We are still working. I need people to know that. I'm not going to editorialize on that. I need people to hear it.
We are 3 hours and 20 minutes into this broadcast. I want to address the international picture in greater detail because it has developed significantly in the last 40 minutes. The United Kingdom has confirmed 17 cases of affected individuals, all linked to transatlantic flights in the last 48 hours. The UK has initiated emergency border procedures at all major ports of entry. Canada has closed its land borders with the United States, all of them, effective 30 minutes ago. Mexico has done the same. The European Union has issued a collective emergency travel advisory against travel to or from the United States. We are now receiving first reports from Spain, Madrid, of a possible incident at Adolfo Suarez Madrid Barajas Airport involving passengers from an American origin flight. France has scrambled military response units to Charles de Gaulle Airport. Japan has quarantined 2 international arrivals. We have gone global.
We have gone global. And I want to stay with that for a moment because in the first hours of this broadcast, there was a part of my mind that was doing what I imagine many of our listeners' minds were doing, trying to find the container, trying to believe that this was a Baltimore thing, a Washington thing, a Northeast thing. Then it became an American thing. And now we are talking about Madrid. We are talking about Tokyo. We are talking about a world that is, as of this morning, no longer the world we woke up in yesterday. I don't know what the right words are for that. I'm not sure there are right words, but I know that what this broadcast has always been, from its first day on air, is a place where we try to be honest. So I'm being honest. I don't know what comes next. I don't think anyone does.
A critical update on the scientific understanding of this pathogen. We have received a document, I'm going to be transparent about this, that was sent to us by a source within the Johns Hopkins research team. We have verified the source. The document is a preliminary internal briefing, not intended for public release, and we are making the editorial judgment that the information it contains is sufficiently important to public safety to read on air. I want to note that this is a decision we did not make lightly. The document states the following. Analysis of transmission vectors indicates that the pathogen is not airborne. Primary transmission requires direct fluid contact. Secondary risk exists from bite wounds inflicted by affected individuals. Critically, affected individuals in advanced stages display a significantly elevated drive to initiate physical contact with unaffected individuals. This behavioral component appears to be neurologically driven and is consistent across all observed cases. Containment, therefore, requires not only perimeter control, but active management of contact between affected and unaffected populations.
Not airborne. That is the most important thing Alex just read, and I want to make sure that every listener understood it. It is not airborne. You cannot breathe it in. You cannot get it from being in the same room as someone who is affected. The transmission requires direct physical contact. And that means, and this is genuinely important, that you have more control over your exposure than you might have thought. The thing that puts you at risk is physical contact with an affected individual, which means distance is your friend. Barriers are your friend. This is not something that will find you in a closed room if you are careful. That doesn't mean you are safe. It means you have agency. And I want people to hold on to that. You have agency. You can make choices that matter. Please make them carefully.
We are approaching the 3.5-hour mark. I want to address what is happening at the governmental level, because there have been several significant developments in the last 30 minutes. The President has convened an emergency session of the National Security Council. The Pentagon has issued an operational status change. That language means military assets are being repositioned, though for what specific purpose has not been stated. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated all 10 of its regional offices. Most significantly, the President is scheduled to address the nation in approximately 25 minutes from a location that the White House press office is declining to specify, which almost certainly means the President is not currently in Washington, D.C. That detail, the President's location being undisclosed, is worth sitting with.
And it is worth sitting with because it tells you something about how the people who have the most complete picture of this situation are behaving. They are behaving as though the most important thing in the world right now is keeping certain people in certain places. And when you think about what the unbroken continuity of government requires, the line of succession, the secure communications, the continuation of command authority, when you think about the fact that these structures are being activated right now for real, not in a drill, that is its own kind of information. It tells you what the people at the top of the information chain believe the trajectory of this is, and their behavior suggests they are not planning for this to be contained within the next few hours.
4 hours into this broadcast, we have reached, in the last 20 minutes, what I am going to describe as a threshold moment. We are now receiving reports from the National Guard in Baltimore, reports that are being cross-referenced with satellite imagery and with communication intercepts that indicate the perimeter containment operation in Baltimore has failed, not partially failed. The perimeter did not hold. The affected population in Baltimore has exceeded the capacity of available Guard units to manage, and the boundaries that were established have been crossed. We have a city of approximately 600,000 people, surrounded by a containment perimeter that was breached approximately 40 minutes ago, and the Guard units have been instructed to fall back to a secondary perimeter. That secondary perimeter is approximately 12 miles from the city center. 12 miles.
Baltimore. I want to say something about Baltimore right now, and I want to say it carefully. Baltimore is a city that has survived so much. It is a city with deep wounds and tremendous resilience. A city of neighborhoods that know each other's names. A city that has come back from things that would have broken other places. And I want to say to anyone who has ever called Baltimore home, who loves that city, who has family there, what is happening there is not a reflection of what that city was or what its people are. The people of Baltimore are living through something that no city, no people, anywhere in human history has been asked to live through in this way and at this speed. And many of them are dying with their neighbors, and many of them are surviving with their neighbors, and all of them, every single one, deserved better than this morning.
The President's address has just begun. I'm going to read from the transcript as it comes across our wire, and I'll stop when I have enough to give our listeners the substance of the remarks. The President began, "My fellow Americans, I am speaking to you from an undisclosed, secure location. Tonight, this morning, our nation faces a challenge unlike any in our history. What began as isolated reports has become, with terrible speed, a crisis of national scale. I will be honest with you, as I have always promised to be. We are in the early stages of understanding what we face. The science is moving as fast as science can move. Our military and emergency personnel are performing with extraordinary courage. But I must ask something difficult of every American who hears my voice. I must ask you to accept uncertainty. I must ask you to follow the guidance of your local authorities, even when that guidance is incomplete. And I must ask you to take care of each other. That is not a platitude. It is the most specific instruction I can give.
Take care of each other. And I heard that and I thought, yes, that is the instruction. Not because it's the only thing the president could say, but because it is genuinely, specifically true. Every mass catastrophe we have ever studied, every event where humans faced something larger than any individual response could address, the thing that determined survival, the thing that determined who made it through and who didn't, was never firepower and was never individual heroism alone. It was communities. It was people who decided that the person next to them mattered, that strangers were worth protecting, that the measure of who they were would be taken in this moment and not in some abstract future. We take care of each other. That is what we do. That is what I am asking.
In the final portion of this broadcast, I want to be as clear as possible about what we know and what it means. The situation at Hour 4 is as follows. Confirmed incident locations in the United States include Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, Atlanta, Columbus, Chicago, where incidents were confirmed in the last 30 minutes, and Los Angeles, where the first confirmed incident was reported 19 minutes ago. The Atlantic seaboard from Maine to Florida is under a federal public health emergency declaration. The Midwest is under active alert. The West Coast is at its earliest stages of response. Outside the United States, confirmed cases exist in the United Kingdom, Spain, France, Canada, and Japan. Brazil has reported suspected cases. Australia has initiated border closure procedures. The pathogen is global.
I want to read one final listener message. This one came in 3 minutes ago. It says, "We are in a community center in Columbus. There are 240 of us. We have water, we have some food, we have a generator. We have 4 people who are nurses and 1 who is an Army medic. We have a perimeter and we check it every 30 minutes. We have children who are doing schoolwork at the tables because their teacher said it was important to keep some things normal. We have a man who brought his guitar and plays every evening. I'm writing this because I want someone to know we exist. We are here, we are okay, we are scared, but we are together. And being together, that is something real. Please keep broadcasting. As long as someone is broadcasting, it means there is still something to broadcast to. We will keep broadcasting."
And now, I want to do something we committed to at the start of this broadcast. I want to tell you how it ends. Because this is a story, a fictional one, as we told you at the outset, but a story that deserves an ending, not a fade to static.
What happened over the days and weeks that followed that first morning was not what anyone predicted. Nothing ever is.
In the scientific understanding that emerged over the following months, the pathogen was formally identified as a synthetic prion variant agent, not naturally occurring. Evidence, ultimately declassified after 3 years of investigation, pointed to an accidental release from a private biotechnology research facility in rural Delaware, operating under a contractor structure several layers removed from any federal oversight. The release occurred approximately 72 hours before the first Baltimore dispatch calls. The 3-day latency period, it turned out, was the reason the perimeter operations failed. Half the people inside those perimeters were already infected when the perimeters went up.
The global death toll, when the final accounting was done 2 years after the outbreak, stood at 212 million people. The number requires a pause. 212 million. That is roughly equal to the combined populations of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. The United States lost 67 million. The European Union lost 41 million. Parts of South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, where dense population and limited containment infrastructure existed, were disproportionately affected. Brazil lost 22 million. The Philippines lost 9 million.
Certain cities and regions were classified, in the aftermath, as Category 0 zones, areas where the affected population overwhelmed all response infrastructure and where the live affected individual presence remained high enough that conventional reoccupation was not possible within the 2-year window. Baltimore was a Category 0 zone. Detroit was a Category 0 zone. Large portions of New Jersey, coastal South Carolina, and the greater Atlanta metropolitan area were Category 0. In Europe, parts of northern Spain, the outskirts of Paris, and one London borough were Category 0. These places were not lost in the sense that the land was gone, but the lives that had filled them were. The networks, the histories, the neighborhoods, unmade.
What remained was, in the coldest mathematical sense, more than half of humanity. And what that half of humanity did, what it built, how it organized itself, how it grieved, and how it refused to stop, that is not a small story. The vaccine, developed by a joint research team drawing on the Johns Hopkins preliminary findings and on work from laboratories in South Korea and Germany, reached sufficient distribution 14 months after the outbreak. The synthetic origin of the pathogen meant it did not mutate, which meant the vaccine worked. That was the gift hidden in the horror of its manufacture. It was designed, things don't evolve. The outbreak ended not with a dramatic moment, not with a single announcement, but with a slowly falling line on an epidemiological graph. The line fell. It kept falling.
In the years following, the nations that survived, and most of them survived in some form, even the most severely affected, entered a period of reconstruction that was in many ways unlike anything that had preceded it. The structures that had governed international cooperation were, in many cases, intact. The science and engineering knowledge of humanity was intact. What was different was the people. There were fewer of them, and the ones who remained had seen something, had lived through something. The political consequences of the outbreak were complex and not always positive. There were nations that emerged from it more authoritarian. There were regions that emerged with greater local self-sufficiency. There were communities that came through it with a kind of hard-won solidarity that became the foundation of something better. The world did not become uniformly better or uniformly worse. It became differently arranged.
And I want to say something about the church in Philadelphia. The 40 people in the church who sang together. The nurse sitting in the parking garage who told us the truth about what she had seen. The doctor in the parking lot triage who said, "We made the decision together." The conductor on the stop train. The transit workers in the dark tunnels. The guitar player in the Columbus Community Center. The 4 nurses and the Army medic. These people, all of these people that lived. I want you to know that in the story we are telling, these specific, named people lived. The doctor went home to her family 2 weeks after the broadcast. The nurse in the parking garage was evacuated by National Guard 20 hours after she wrote to us. The 40 people in the church were reached by a FEMA convoy on the 3rd day. The community center in Columbus became, in the years that followed, a civic landmark, a designated historical site, bearing a plaque that reads simply, "We were here, we were scared, we were together."
The facility in Delaware from which the pathogen was released was, after the investigation concluded, the subject of the largest wrongful death litigation in the history of human jurisprudence. The 3 senior researchers most directly responsible for the conditions that led to the release died in the outbreak, not prosecuted, not punished in any conventional sense, but not untouched by what they had done. The company itself was dissolved. The regulatory frameworks governing private biotechnology research were fundamentally restructured, globally, through an international treaty signed by 141 nations, the largest single international regulatory agreement ever negotiated. Something that good required something that terrible to make it possible. That is not a comfortable fact. We are not going to make it comfortable.
We want to be clear about what the world looks like 2 years out. It looks diminished, and it looks altered, and it also looks, in places, achingly beautiful. The Category 0 cities were not permanently abandoned. Within 5 years, remediation efforts began. Within a decade, people were moving back. Not as many, not the same people, but people nonetheless drawn back by the same thing that had always drawn people to cities, each other. The need for proximity, for community, for the particular kind of warmth that comes from being in the middle of other human lives. That impulse did not die. 212 million people died, and the impulse to be near one another did not die.
We said at the beginning of this broadcast that this story is fictional. We meant that. No real places were harmed. No real people died. We told you this story because we believe in the power of stories to prepare people, not for the specific thing we described, which is, we trust, fantastical enough that no one is confusing it for a weather report, but for the emotional shape of catastrophe, for the way information comes in fragments, for the way the scale of numbers can overwhelm our ability to feel them, for the way the people on the front lines of crisis keep doing their jobs even when their jobs have become impossible, for the way communities hold together or don't, for the way the world changes and then slowly keeps going.
Silent Waves Radio has been your companion for this broadcast. We have been your hosts, Alex Mercer and Sierra Lane, and we want to say, with complete sincerity, that we are grateful you stayed with us, that you held still for over 4 hours and let a dark story be told to you carefully, and that you are, as far as we know, sitting wherever you are, alive and intact. That is not nothing. In this story, in this world, that is never nothing.
If there is one thing that fiction of this kind asks of us, it is to think about the ordinary world we live in, the grid, the hospitals, the transit systems, the emergency responders, the researchers in the labs, and to think about them not as background infrastructure, but as the active and ongoing miracle that they represent. Every day that the power stays on is a day that thousands of people showed up to their jobs and did them correctly. Every day that you can call for an ambulance and one comes is a day that the system held. These things are not guaranteed. They are chosen and built and maintained, and they are worth caring about.
And if you heard something in this broadcast that moved you, in the fictional nurse sitting in the parking garage, in the fictional 40 people singing together in a church, we hope you'll think about why it moved you, what it tells you about what you value, what it tells you about what you would do, who you would be in a moment of genuine and overwhelming crisis. We hope you'd be the kind of person who stays, who sings, who checks on the neighbor, who tells the truth even when the truth is hard, who does their job even when the job has become something no job description could have anticipated. We believe you would be. We believe that about people.
This has been Silent Waves Radio. The broadcast is now concluded. Stay safe, stay informed, and stay with each other. That last one is not optional.
Not optional. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Good morning.